Hello and welcome to the Star Wars Universe podcast. Today we are starting a rewatch of all of these Star Wars movies, and we're going to be doing them in chronological order. We're actually going to try and find the good parts of all of them, talk about some problems we have with them, and then also talk about where they fit into the larger plot narratives of the whole overarching Skywalker Star Wars epic drama. So please follow along with us. Today we are talking about the first of those movies, The Phantom Menace. It's me with Jeff Randall. All that and more after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. My name is Matthew. I'm one of your co-hosts. Joining me as will be for all of these Star Wars rewatches that we may sometimes have a third person in the seat is Jeff Randall. Jeff, how are we doing today?
Fantastic, sir. How are you?
I am pretty good. I've been the Clone Wars is fun, Mandalorian's fun, but for me the heart and soul of Star Wars is always going to be these movies, and so I'm excited to dive into them, and especially do it the way we're doing chronologically, where we can really look at each movie in its own merits, but then also talk about how does each movie contribute to the overall story.
Yeah, and there's an interesting outlook that we can bring into this discussion, in that this movie, The Phantom Menace, or as I like to call it, The Fandom Menace.
Well put.
It sits in a unique spot because I've said before in other shows, a sequel has a very an important job and a unique job as far as a movie franchise is concerned. It's the one that really sets the tone going forward. It's either more of the same.
A prequel, right?
No, a sequel.
Okay, go ahead.
It's either more of the same that you've already established in the first one, or you go in a direction that's completely different. And this movie holds a unique position even within that, in that it starts a sequel trilogy. And we call it a prequel because it happens chronologically earlier, but let's be honest, this is a sequel trilogy. It's building out more of the world.
Right.
And this one movie in particular kicks off that, because we have to establish the tone of what happened back then, when this movie was set, and what direction we want to, or the director should, kind of be wanting to go in, and kind of establish the whole tone of this trilogy. If you're deciding it has to be a trilogy right up front,
right,
this is the kind of place where you have to establish all of that and lay your foundation.
I think that's a really good point. And I think because, and we're going to get into the plot summary before we talk about general thoughts, but I'll just quite respond to you on that note. The more I rewatch this movie, the more that I think, if someone told me I'm going to go watch a kid's sci-fi movie that was aimed at, 8-year-olds, but that all adults could enjoy, that was taking place in a science fiction world about a young kid who saves the galaxy, and maybe also those going in some not great directions, I think this would be a fine example of that kind of movie. I think a lot of my problems with the movie are the role it is supposed to play in the Star Wars overarching story, and the way that it doesn't do that. And I have a specific idea about that I'll get to, but let's just start with a plot summary. Can you give us a quick summary for those folks who have perhaps want to hear us discuss it, but don't necessarily want to go back and watch 2 hours of Jar Jar Binks and pod racing again?
Oh, man. It was 2 hours of Jar Jar Binks and pod racing. You said it. It's right there. It's done. No, the movie opens with the standard crawl. We've gotten used to a lot of exposition happening right out of the gate, in text form that you have to somehow remember while the movie's going on. And then our protagonists, we'll call them, of the movie, our two Jedi Knights, find themselves being the negotiators of a trade agreement, or a trade dispute, to try to break a blockade around this one planet. And that's kind of the crux of the whole thing. The whole thing is, how do we break this blockade? And there's negotiation that they try to do, except that nobody wants to negotiate with them. They try to kill them. Our Jedi find themselves on the planet that is being blockaded. a lot of stuff happens in a lot of scenes that end up with our protagonist meeting with Jar Jar Binks, a very unfortunate addition to the movie, some might say, and then eventually finding their way through to the capital of Naboo, which is the planet being, I guess it's the city and the planet. Like, there's no name of the city. That's mildly frustrating. Geography is important, guys.
I think it's actually, I know the name specifically because it's referenced in a Weird Al Yankovic song.
Thebe.
Thebe. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that we both remembered the name of the city because of Weird Al Yankovic. Thank you.
Yeah, we went to Thebe to see the Queen. There it is.
You know what I was talking about.
Yep.
Go on.
Yep. So they met our Queen, Amidala. Very, very fanciful dress.
Queen Amidala.
Very fanciful dress. They meet her.
Very good hair.
Yep. She goes through about 15 different costume changes before we actually get off the planet, I think. No, that's an exaggeration. I should be nice. They escape with the Queen to try to get to the Senate to attempt to talk them into doing something, much like, modern government these days. They can't make it there. They get stranded on Tatooine, where they have to fix their hyperdrive. And the only guy in the whole freaking planet that can fix the hyperdrive is Watto, who just also happens to have a slave kid who just happens to be Anakin Skywalker.
Right. As Qui-Gon Jinn tells us, it is the will of the Force that they meet.
Yes, yeah. We'll say that. It's the will of the plot that they meet.
I just want to point out that when we started talking about this, Jeff was concerned that I would be too negative about the movie.
No.
So please remember, with the editorial commentary that he's giving in his plot summary.
I was worried that I would be too negative about the movie.
That's fair. Okay. You're reminding yourself.
Yep. And here I am being nitpicky.
Uh-huh. Well, we'll get there. Just tell people what happens.
Yep. So, a wager is made for the hyperdrive because Republican credits don't work out here. They're no good here. Only whatever money they have. Sure. Right. A wager is made for the ship against the hyperdrive, and a lie is made to say that Qui-Gon is in possession of the pod racer that Anakin was building in secret, and with that, like, betting that pod against a slave, if I'm not mistaken, a game of chance where they had to pick which slave with a chance cube, aka a D6.
Pretty much.
Or not even that, as a D2.
Yeah.
Because it had two colors. So
6-sided dice that's all red and blue.
Yeah.
Sounds like a very, very boring game of chance.
Right? Like, it's either one or it's two. Whoa, let's go. Human lives are on the line. Let's go ahead and flip it. So that pod was entered into the race and also used as the collateral in a race that looks like if he didn't win it, then the pod would be destroyed anyway. So that's a bad bet on Watto's part. Beside the point, Anakin ends up winning because he has to, because plot. He's our hero, right? He's our kid hero. We're introduced to the kid hero in this part of the tale. Once they get the hyperdrive and get it installed, they make their way to the boring part of the movie. To Coruscant, where it's all Senate discussion and talking in the Jedi Council, and the plot slows down a lot here. But before they leave Tatooine, Qui-Gon has his first run-in with the new Sith, maybe not Master, whatever, Darth Maul. And we've been hinting at Sidious through pretty much the entire movie. Like, anybody who watches Star Wars enough knows exactly who this character is, knows, like, you know him when you see him, and you have a finger point moment of, don't trust that guy! But they're trusting of that guy, and it's gonna go downhill. But we know that.
Which I did realize, I've always wondered about this. Like, obviously, the minute we meet Senator Palpatine, I, of course, know that he's actually Darth Sidious as well. Most people do. But I've talked to a number of people for whom this was their first Star Wars movie they saw as a kid, and whose parents, I guess, had done a good job of protecting them from that, and they said they had no idea. So I was like, okay, so actually they did kind of pull that off for some people. That's a positive note.
Well, yeah, they pulled it off for the people who hadn't seen Star Wars at all.
Right, exactly.
So
go on.
Anyway, so they do the Senate thing. The Senate pushes back. There's a call for new leadership. Guess who? Senator Palpatine is getting put into that space. Anyway, then Queen Amidala says, this is taking too long. Let me go fight. And they go back to Naboo to fight, taking Jar Jar along with them, where Jar Jar has to find the Gungan people and whatever location they have hidden out in their holy place so that they can rally those guys into a fight that they... I would say that they have no part of, but it's their planet, so they absolutely have to, they have to step up if they want to not be enslaved or trade agreemented, whatever. What are the stakes of this trade agreement? Anyway,
we have no idea.
Sorry, I'm getting more frustrated as I talk about it.
That's very fair.
So they rally the Gungans while there's a secret mission going on with Amidala infiltrating her own palace and taking over the city, while Anakin oopses his way into flying into space, and apparently a course was already set, the coordinates were already laid in, and he was taken to the point that was controlling all of the droids, which... Again, like, super convenient. I don't know why you wouldn't have a backup, but that's beside the point.
Yeah. Not to mention having... Star Wars apparently now believes that the only way to destroy a major ship is by having some kind of power reactor where there's a big globe on top of a little globe, and that you always have to knock the big globe into the small globe to set off a reaction to destroy the whole ship. Now, why that reactor is directly accessible by lasers from the main hangar where lots of ships hang out, potentially firing lasers, is a little bit of a question to me.
That's architecture. That's a bad architecture.
Yeah, it's some real bad architecture.
Anyway,
so I think that's a good plot summary, though. It kind of gives us a good full idea of all that happens. Let's talk about general thoughts. And I think it's pretty clear already that we both have a lot of negative things to say about the movie, and I think I can find some positives.
Yep.
I think, though, that in this watch, though, I for the first time truly understand what is the heart and soul of my problem with this movie, and it's my heart and soul with all of the prequels, really. And for me, it comes down to this. This story, the reason I think it's important that it's a prequel, not a sequel, is a sequel can take where we started and go in any direction.
Yes.
But a prequel, we know where it has to end. And it has to tell us how we got to the point that we were in with the movies that we loved already. So that's already a hard thing to do. And I'll acknowledge it's a hard thing to do, especially when we've had literally, I think it was 17 years in between these two, in between Return of the Jedi and Phantom Menace. And a lot of, fan nostalgia is built up. I know for me, I'd watched these movies as a kid. I was super excited to see Phantom Menace. Also part of why I was so disappointed by it. But here's the key, I think, is that the prequels had to do two things that are both more complex and more nuanced stories than anything that Star Wars has told before. It has to tell us the story of the decline of the Republic and the decline of the Jedi and why they were able to be corrupted so easily by Palpatine. And it also had to show us the decline and fall of Anakin Skywalker and how someone who started out as such a heroic kid could slowly over time be seduced by the dark side. Those are very complicated and somewhat adult stories. Not that they have to have nudity and cursing, but they're not PG. I mean, they involve a good deal of complexity and nuance that you don't get into if you have a battle or a pod race every 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so I think they needed, in the same way that the Netflix Marvel shows went a lot deeper into complex issues than some of the movies have gone. For the same kind of reason. Like it's a different medium. You can go there in a different way. But Lucas made a conscious decision to say, I want these prequels to be specifically aimed at kids. I want them to be even more kid-friendly than the original movies were. Kid-friendly and deep exploration of nuance and complexity don't work.
And for me, certainly don't mesh.
I think that's the fundamental problem. Because you talked about how boring the scenes on Coruscant were. To me, those scenes are the heart and soul of the movie.
They should have been.
To be. Yeah, that's what everything should be about. And it could have been like interesting diplomatic maneuvering back and forth. You could have had some fighting here and there, if that's the place for a lightsaber battle between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon. It doesn't have to just be 2 hours of negotiations. Like, people have heard me on talk with you guys about the MCU on superhero ethics, have heard, like, I think Marvel Civil War, which is 2 hours of diplomatic wrangling over how to write the Sokovia Accords, I want to see that movie. Most people don't. I get that. But I think that this movie had to go into so much more nuance. It had to have so much more complexity. And you just can't do that with a kid's movie.
You can't.
And let me rephrase that. You can do it with something that seems like it's aimed at kids. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a TV show that is ostensibly on the surface a kid's show, but it doesn't try to dumb it down for kids. There is no Jar Jar Binks anywhere in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Avatar: The Last Airbender says we're going to talk to kids, but we're going to talk to them about very complex, very nuanced issues in ways they can understand. She-Ra, another of my favorite TV shows, does the exact same thing. And I feel like Lucas had no interest in doing that. And that's, for me, that's the most damning thing about this movie and all three of the prequels is it means, therefore, that the point of them is completely lost.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I remember when this came out, I was in the demographic for this movie. I mean, it was 1999?
Yeah, you're only a couple of years younger than me, right?
Yeah, I was in middle school when this movie came out. So
you're a little more than that. Yeah, like for me, this was the night it opened was the day of our last final exam, the year I graduated college.
Okay.
So this was like the way we so we were at different ages, but we were both very similar.
Yep. So this movie was for me. It was made for me. It was written for me. It was aimed at me, and I ate it up. I ate the shit up. And then as I grew up and I went back and watched it again, I was like, man, this was not great. This was not great at all. And I went back and watched it a couple of days ago in preparation for this episode we're doing here, and I was like, God, what did PG do to offend the FCC or whoever? Like, wow, my God. Because I went back and looked, they're all on Disney Plus. So I was just like, scan through, check the rating, A New Hope, Empire, and Return. All three are PG. But like, a man gets his arm cut off in the first one. There's blood on the floor. Like, that's kind of it's a more PG-13 type of thing. And then
find out a dude kissed his sister.
Right. Like, these are a little bit more advanced than what we got. And then in this movie and in Attack of the Clones, they're also PG, but they were PG of the 90s. And if you remember, the 90s had a huge push to like clean things up for kids and make things a lot more kid friendly, in air quotes. And kids, depending on the age and depending on the maturity of the child, like everybody's unique, but kids for the most part can handle complex messages. You just have to word it right. And that's where I think that Avatar: The Last Airbender comes in. Yes, it was, a decade later that it came out or whatever, but it's still something that's kid friendly, but also addresses those complex issues, but it also does it across several seasons of show. And you can't really do that sort of thing. Like, you have to make it slow for kids because they have to take it in little bites and a little bit at a time, and then, take it in, address it, and figure out what a word means or, anything like that. Like, oh man,
Yeah.
My 11-year-old was like, "What does turmoil mean?" I was like, "Oh, geez, okay."
Like, I almost wish that, and again, maybe this is today. It seems like we can make as many Disney movies as we want. I understand that back then they didn't know this, but I feel like if Lucas had said, you know what, I want to make a Star Wars that's able to bring in the new generation of kids, and I realized I was incorrect there. You and I are not the same demographic. I misunderstood what you were saying. You were very much not the same demographic because I grew up on the first generation of movies. You grew up on this one.
Right.
And thank you for clarifying that. But if Lucas had said, you know what, I want to make a set of Star Wars movies that's to bring kids back in, and we're going to dumb it down even more than the original ones, that's fine. And maybe I'll watch those movies, and maybe I don't. Like the Clone Wars animated movie was that, and that's fine. I don't like that movie, but there you go.
God.
We are going to watch it, though.
Oh, don't make me.
But to do that for the prequels just seemed utterly wrong. And I think we're at this point, we should probably move on because we keep repeating that thought. But yeah. So let's talk about some character arcs. And let's start with the one who was, I think, going to be the most important. You know, literally the character is the most important over the first 6 movies.
Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yes, Anakin Skywalker. What's your kind of take on his plot arc?
He doesn't have one in this movie.
Yeah.
He honestly does not. Like, he is a slave, he gets freed. The plot happens to him. Yeah. Literally everything happens to him. He does not have a choice in anything that he does.
See, here's where and again, I'm always in danger of overhead canoning, I know that. And I'm always in danger of giving writers too much credit. But that part, I think, actually is kind of is what the story needed to do.
That's the point of it?
Yeah, because I think part of it is that Anakin is this spoiled little kid. That Anakin is this person, like, you know, there's lots of great psychology stuff about how the people who are told since they're a very young age that they're special and gifted and prodigal and all this stuff wind up having massive emotional problems when they grow up. Not all of them. I'm sure, I hope many of our listeners are that category, and I'm not meaning to impugn you, but that many do. I know I certainly, it sounds like a humble brag. I was not told as a prodigy, but I was given a lot of praise as a kid.
Same.
And I had to wrestle later with like, am I, what do you mean these are responsibilities? What am I not living up to that potential? And I feel like Anakin, by the second and third movies, really does have a sort of like, I can do no wrong kind of attitude. I don't have to listen to anybody else attitude. And I do think he gets some of that from this. So that's the one positive thing I can say. I will say, now, to be clear, because I think, like many fandoms, but I think Star Wars gets a little bit more of a reputation of having a toxic fandom. I think we have a small part of our fandom that is toxic, but it is also very, very loud and has been very loud about things that people really cared about. And I think that's entirely unacceptable. And I don't want to just say here, I think that the portrayal of Anakin is not what I'm all interested in watching. I don't think there's any reason to blame an 8-year-old actor or a 12-year-old actor, whatever Jake Lloyd was, for this performance. No. When you have a child actor, that's entirely dependent. First of all, the writing is just absolute hot garbage. But also, I mean, a good director can get a child actor. The fact that director looked at the performance that child actor did and said, that's fine, let's put that on screen, that tells me that is 100% the director's fault, not the actor's. So,
absolutely.
Just want to say, let's not start a Jake Lloyd bash session. But you're right, it is. Did you get really creeped out watching him kind of like a little boy flirt with, like telling Padme that she looks like an angel and all of this, knowing where they wind up?
It was a little weird.
Yeah. Like, I remember,
dude, you're 9.
Yeah. To me, a 9-year-old boy saying that to a teenage girl, I think is actually totally understandable. For the teenage girl to later, fall into bed with him 20 years later seems really creepy to me.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, if someone was my babysitter when I was 15 and when they were 15 and I was 9, I probably would have a little crush on them in the way a 9-year-old boy does where he doesn't understand anything. That also sets up a dynamic between us that makes it really creepy if we ever get together 20 years later.
That's a fair point there, sir. That's a fair point.
There you go. Boys, don't date your former babysitters.
Yeah. I think a lot of the issue with it, we talked about the PG rating having a detriment on it. I think the build up to this movie was probably the worst offender. in how this came to be. Because it wasn't just us, it wasn't just your expectation of what this movie was going to be that got built up over that time. If you looked at the end credits, the first thing that shows up is written and directed by George Lucas. That is the only name on writing and directing. This one guy had control of this whole property for decades that he was just sitting on stewing. And it, like, after watching it again, like, I don't think he bounced any of these ideas off of anybody. He was just like, I know what's good for this world. Let me make this.
I think there's something that happens to creators where, and actually I know someone who is a professional editor who's told me this definitely happens, where you get popular enough that you think you don't need an editor anymore. Yeah. And where you're so big that editors don't feel comfortable saying, I don't want to publish this. You know, I think George R.R. Martin, I think, is a fantastic writer for whom the editors stopped doing their jobs around book 4. And that book 4 and 5 are really hurt by that. And I think you're exactly right. No one was sitting down with Lucas and saying, like, Jar Jar Binks is coming off as kind of racist. And
the whole Gungan tribe.
Yeah, as are these, like, Asian super stereotypical traders. And the merchant with a huge nose and a kind of Jewish accent. Like, you know, and the kid actor doesn't make sense. And, yeah, anyway, let's go to another... Well, let's just talk about actually the discussion about, and this kind of gets into Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's journey, but I think it's mostly about Anakin. What's your kind of take on the whole discussion about whether or not he should be trained as a Jedi?
I mean, so the discussion surrounding that is all centered in and based on an established way of doing things that the Jedi Order has. The problem is we're never shown what that looks like in the normal sense. We're not even not shown. It's not even described. Like there's no point where Yoda or Mace Windu or Ki-Adi-Mundi or fucking Plo Koon, like anybody who was in that room, like there's no point where any of them are like, you know that the maximum age limit is 3, right? Like, there's none of that. They just say he's too old. Like, okay, but what does that actually mean? Is he too mature? Has he seen too much? Like, would the Mandalorian as a child not have been a good candidate because he saw too much pain? Like, is it that he's just aged too much? Like, is it a physical thing? Like, what is it about him that makes him too old to go into this training? And what repercussions would there be that you have seen in the past that makes you say this?
And I think they kind of hint at it because they are saying, like, because he already has this strong attachment to his mother and the fear he has. But you're right, because of the fact they never portray it, they never discuss it in any way. And there's just so much that doesn't make sense about it. Like, they say that at one point, Qui-Gon Jinn says that, like, you know, if Anakin had been born on not an Outer Rim territory planet, then the Jedi would have identified him.
Yep.
Now, what that means is the
they
Jedi
would have taken him away from his mother.
Right. Which, okay, that sounds like a Chinese gymnastics you know, I shouldn't single out Chinese. Like, a lot of folks have done that, but it sounds like, you know, one of those horrible, like, you know, take the kid away at a very young age. I mean, Hollywood does that too. But yeah, that sounds creepy enough. But what I'm getting at is, Anakin can't be the only Force-sensitive kid being born in the Outer Rim territories. We have seen people from other Outer Rim planets who become Jedi. So how, you know, what happens to all of them? Like, what happens to, you know, when Windu says, like, we know he's incredibly powerful in the Force, but we don't want to train him. Do you want to just give him a one-way ticket to the Sith? Like, what do you think this 8-year-old is going to do and say, well, I have all these Force powers, but, yeah, I didn't get trained in them, so I'll just stop controlling people's minds and having great combat reflexes.
And especially in front of him. In front of the kid. Like, you never talk shit about the kid in front of the kid.
Yeah.
That's parenting, you know?
Well, and here's again where if I headcanon hard, I think they are trying to imply something, and that I think Last Jedi actually answers, to jump ahead to a different movie, which I know is very controversial. But I think what they were trying to do is to say the Jedi Council is wrong. Like the Jedi, that this whole idea of taking kids away from their mother at a young age is wrong. And that this is the part of the Jedi that's fundamentally broken. Especially because we've already seen a Jedi become a Jedi at 19 and do a very good job of being a Jedi. His name was Luke. And so I think that's what they're trying to set up. And I think the TV show, The Clone Wars, definitely makes that clear. But they just do such a bad job of it. Like you said, they don't explain it, and they never give us a point of view character saying, maybe you're wrong, that we have no idea if the writers think this is a great thing.
Yeah, the point of view character who says the Jedi Council is wrong doesn't even say that, like, he doesn't outright say the Jedi Council is wrong. It's Qui-Gon. And his thing is not they're wrong, it's, well, I'm going to do it anyway. Like, what? That's so against what they're doing. And then you've got his own apprentice, his own Padawan that's just like, hey man, you could be on the council by now if you weren't such a dick to them. Like,
which also to me, and this is another one of the fundamental flaws I think of the movie, again, we have to get to a certain place. Yeah. One of the places we have to get to is where Obi-Wan is telling Luke that I was arrogant, and in my hubris, I thought I could train Anakin on my own without the help of someone like Yoda, but I was wrong, and I take responsibility for why Anakin fell.
Yeah, man, it takes a village. We know this.
Yeah, but that's not what happens here. According to this, it's Qui-Gon who does that, and Obi-Wan only does it not out of arrogance, not out of hubris, not out of his own belief, but out of a promise to his dying master.
And I noticed something that I don't think it's canon, but it's fun to think it. Whenever Qui-Gon was dying, he touched Obi-Wan on the cheek, and then like his hand came down, but he had his two fingers up in his normal Jedi mind trick kind of hand motion. And a sound, like an audible signal was given for something. It was like a woof sound right then. And I was like, did he just mind trick Obi-Wan into training Anakin?
That would be... I have very great trouble believing that was intentional. But that's a headcanon that works, because maybe Obi-Wan was mind-tricked into thinking that he was the arrogant one.
Yep.
It makes his scene with Luke completely different.
Doesn't it? It just wrecks the whole franchise.
Oof. There's another bit of headcanon that I've heard that I actually really like, and I think someone said that like they were debating putting this into one of the movies, and that someone in Lucasfilms thought this was part of it, or someone in Disney by the time they were making the postquels thought this should be added somewhere, but maybe it's complete headcanon, I don't know. But it was the idea that the way they were going to kind of retcon the midichlorians was to say, the Jedi were basically a religion that was built around this faith, and that part of the problem with them, part of why they fall, is they became too rigid, they became too locked in their structures, and they started to think that they could scientifically understand the Force. And so they had this whole scientific theory of midichlorians, which was kind of like the evangelicals who try to come up with scientific equations to prove God.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, that would make total sense if that's, but that's the thing, is so much of the understanding of this movie only works if you think this is all through the eyes of an unreliable narrator. And the movie never tells you that it is.
Yeah. This is all told by a child who wasn't there for most of it.
Right.
And
okay.
Sorry.
Let's go to another character arc. What's your take on Palpatine?
I don't have a take on Palpatine.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't feel like I know what he wants. I know he wants power, but do you think he wanted the droids to capture Naboo? Or did he always want Naboo to win because it would help but that the conflict would set up the situation where he was in power?
I don't think he cared. Yeah. Because all of that all of that was just a pawn in his ploy to get to the point of Chancellor. And once he's got that, then Naboo's and its conflict has run its course. He doesn't care anymore.
Right.
Because it has no consequences, no stakes in the overall arcing plot, as far as the Senate is concerned. Like, once the conflict on Naboo is done, that's it.
Yeah. I wish we'd had something about that, because you do see when Sidious is talking to the Neomodians, he does frequently say like how frustrated he is and how he wants this all to be changed. And I think you're right that I think that's kind of an act, that he doesn't really care. But we never actually see that in any way.
Yeah, we're given a bad, and honestly, he doesn't even portray himself as bad in this movie. Like, we don't know, we don't find out that he's bad until later on. So, he needs to keep up the act of looking like he cares. Right.
Well, yeah, I also mean, like, but we're also seeing him as Sidious,
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what Sidious, I have no idea what Sidious's plot is here. But yeah, I think I agree with that. I think it's interesting to see that he's good at these kind of machinations. I think it's helpful to see that he's kind of like, he's playing 3-dimensional chess while the Jedi are playing checkers.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so badly done.
Well, it's time to cut some robots in half. Blit, blit, blit. Yeah. It's unfortunate that those are, like, that's the action of the movie and that's the exciting part, but it shouldn't be. And it shouldn't have happened with such frequency. Like, I think that there was more lightsaber use in this one movie than all of the original trilogy combined.
Well, I think you're probably right, but I think there's two things there. One is, I think, like, they fundamentally changed what lightsabers are. In the original movies, lightsabers are basically claymores. You have two people standing fairly solidly on 2 feet, swinging these heavy 2-handed weapons at each other.
Yep.
In this movie, you have martial artists dancing around each other with what seem to basically be rapiers, or even like foils.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's here where I feel conflicted, because I feel like that doesn't fit canon, but I do feel like it's a lot more fun to watch. And I think you're right that there's a little bit too much of it. But also for me, I mean, I think the highlight of the movie is the Duel of the Fates. I think that lightsaber battle is one of the best we've ever gotten in Star Wars.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially after Qui-Gon gets stabbed and it's just Obi-Wan. Because that, like, the double block that he does behind his back and then bringing it down in front of him to block it in the front of him, like, from the 2 blades, like, oh, it's masterful. The choreography is so good there. But then, like, the whole rest of the movie with the lightsaber fights is just like, let's cut some droids in half. If I swing my lightsaber, then the animators will make it look like I deflected a laser blast back into a robot or into a different robot.
Yeah, certainly lightsabers against non-lightsaber users. I think that is... I was thinking just of, like, lightsaber duels against other people's lightsabers, but you're right. Those scenes are completely boring.
Yeah.
And kind of pointless.
Well, there's no stakes. We know that they're going to be okay.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the problem with a prequel in general. And that's part of why, and we'll get to it when we get to it, Rogue One is far and away my favorite prequel.
Oh, absolutely.
We know that the plans get out, but we have no idea what happens to any of the other characters. And I won't spoil the ending, but I'll just say that the ending, I didn't know what would happen in the ending, because in a way I did with the prequels. I will also just say, though, about Darth Maul. Do you know the story about how that actor got cast?
Of how Ray Park got cast?
Yeah.
No.
So Ray Park was a fight choreographer.
Yeah.
And he was teaching him how to do it, and so he was playing the part of Darth Maul in the fights, like, as he was teaching Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor. And eventually people were just like, why don't we just have him play Darth Maul?
Oh, that's kind of like the Gerard Butler doing his own singing in Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, and apparently there was at one point he was not going to have any written dialogue, he was just never going to say a word, which I think would have made him so much more imposing and scary.
It would have, but I would have felt so bad for Ray Park. Like in this watch, I paused it at one point. I looked at the kids and I was like, guys, did you see what happened? Like, that was like a minute of a scene. That guy had one line. And that was it. He said, "Yes, my master," and that was it. That's all he said. But he had to show up at like 6 a.m. to get started on makeup and sit in the chair for like 9 hours just to say that one line and go home.
Well, but that's my point, is I feel like he does so much more than give that line. I think his just imposing presence is so powerful that I feel like almost the things he speaks take away from that.
Yeah. I mean...
But...
I think
I can see it being annoying for the actor for sure.
It's it's that being a physical actor thing is a problem, or being a stunt actor is a problem because like they don't want to give you lines because you might screw it up. But if he had no lines, it would be imposing only because like it would be imposing in retrospect only because we know how much of a badass he is at the end of the movie. Because we don't really see him being any sort of a badass at the beginning or in his first fight, like on Tatooine. Like we don't see him like he has a little bit of a skiff.
I thought, like every time he appears, I thought he was such a like imposing, interesting presence.
Yeah, he's this dark, broody, shadowy, robed figure that also has crazy face paint and horns coming out of his head. Like that's an imposing visage to have in front of you, but like without knowing that he can back that up, I wouldn't think anything of him.
Interesting. Okay, we had a very different reaction to him then, but I can see that too. Let's keep moving on. Best and worst moments, and start with the best. We have to find some.
There has to be a best moment.
I mean, I think I just named one, the Duel of the Fates. I think it's
that was.
And it's unfortunate that it is intercut with two of the worst battle scenes that we ever had in Star Wars. The ridiculous Gungan droid fight and the, starship fight. But just the pacing, the choreography, the set, I mean, as often happens with these, if you really think about it, you're like, why in the world does that set exist anywhere? Like, especially in like the Nabooian capital. But it was just wonderfully done. It was intense. It was scary. Qui-Gon Jinn is the only person you do have real stakes for because you know that he isn't still around by the end of these three movies, but you don't know if he's going to make it to the second one.
Could have at least brought him to the second one. Come on.
And well, it's it was done so subtly because again I think the PG rating. The scene of Darth Maul falling and then his body coming apart is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was that was real solid on the effects work there.
Yeah,
and especially for spoiler things to happen.
What do you mean? Oh yeah, for where he comes back. Yeah,
when he comes back.
What's another best moment for you?
I think a best moment is there being a Jedi Council and Yoda being on it. Because throughout the first three movies, the original trilogy, all we're told is that, the Jedi Order is dead. It's long ago, that's a long dead thing. And then we get shown, I don't want to say immediately, but like at the beginning of Act 2 of this movie, or, this one probably has a 5-act structure. I haven't thought about it too much, but when they get to Coruscant, like we see Coruscant, we see the Jedi Council, we see more than one freaking Jedi on the screen at the same time. And it's crazy. It's crazy to think like all of these guys are badasses. Like think of what this room could do as far as power. And then to know that all of these guys in some way get wrecked and like within the next 30 years, they're gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful moment. Like I did think, like as clumsy as it was, and as I think they could have done it so much better, it was really great to see all those things. To see Coruscant, to see the Senate, to see these things, and to start having some of that world building be done. Yeah. Even though I thought it could have been done so much better. And to me, I think my other really great moment is that. I know, you've heard me argue with our friend Matt Carroll about this, but I feel like the Star Wars movies have incredible ethical depth to them. for me, a lot of that's because of the Jedi training and Jedi ideals.
Yep.
And I think that while what Yoda says in Empire and Return of the Jedi is great, in this movie he does say what I think becomes sort of the most emblematic line of that philosophy. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Which I just think is like there's so much truth in the idea of like that anger can take you too far and can take you like that fear leads to anger. And I think that's so true. Like think about so many of the like what we see as hateful political movements in our country. Racism, anti-immigrant, like whatever it is, it's almost always driven by fear.
Yeah.
And so that one line, I always have to remember that like probably maybe one of my favorite lines in all of Star Wars comes from this movie that I otherwise can't stand.
That's really funny.
So what are worst moments?
Literally every time Jar Jar is on the screen.
Yeah. It's not just that he's racist, though it's definitely that, but it's also just he's just unpleasant and is just. I don't want to watch someone win a battle by pratfalling. Like that's not interesting to me. That's to me the kind of thing that would make me like. I watch shows like Avatar because it doesn't do that, because that doesn't feel like a kid's show. It feels like dumbing down to where it's like, parents, you don't have to watch this. This is just for kids.
Yep. What would have been really great is if instead of him oopsing his way through the entirety of the movie, if he actually like grew a little bit and it became, or even if it got exposed as like, it's not him just being clumsy, he's got this calculated approach and like things just happen in his favor, or, whatever the case may be. I don't think that things happening in his favor is necessarily the right way to go because he electrocuted himself in the freaking face. Yeah. But like if he grew a bit and actually like had a plan, even a quick in the moment, like in this battle, quick plan on the fly. And then we see some growth in that his plan worked, it had a solid foundation, a beginning and end, and like all the steps in it. And then it actually did end up working. And maybe he did a little bit of improv in the middle of it, but ultimately his plan pays off and he gets respected because of it. Not just like, I oops my way around the battlefield until somebody else turns off the robots.
Yeah. Especially because one of the overarching themes in Star Wars has always been, and like George Lucas talked about this a lot in terms of his like feelings on Joseph Campbell and like the power of myth, the battle of, nature and man against machine, and that this was in the 70s when like, looking back on it, it looks like incredible that they thought there was any sort of technology at all back then. But like, that was when computers were really starting to enter, public life, not just like for the government and scientists. And machine, factories and machines were taking people's jobs was the perception. And I think they're like, it's a big idea, and like Luke against Darth Vader is man against, or Anakin inside Darth Vader, it's man against machine. And the Ewoks is, nature against machines. And so to have that same like nature against machines and have nature get its butt so thoroughly kicked. Let me, in terms of other worst moments, I'm curious, as you were that target demographic, what was your thought on the pod race scene when you first saw it, and what was your thought on it now? Okay,
when I first saw the pod race scene, I thought it was awesome because this is a high energy, presumably high stakes, action sequence. And even this time watching it again, I was like, this is actually not a bad idea. Like, this is a pretty cool thing that they're doing. Like, this, not only does it like kind of provide a look into Anakin and his reaction time, why they think that he might actually be a Force user or, strong with the Force. Like, he's got the reflexes of a pilot, whatever. Like, it shows his mechanical prowess. It sets up his character later to be a pilot and working on droids and whatever. But like, even so, it builds out the world and adds in like, of course there's going to be this form of entertainment on this backwater planet of racing. Matt, Sorry, Matthew. Matthew, this is dirt bikes. That's what this is. This is a dirt bike race in freaking West Virginia. You know, like that's what's going on here. And it fleshes out that world and shows that there's other people, not just people in a cantina, but like other people who also have goals. Sebulba wants to, be the big racer. Like that's a big thing. We both know that doesn't mean shit in the grand scheme of things as far as Star Wars goes, but like he's got his goals and he's there doing it. I'm frustrated that like there were like these ideas, these like little flights of fancy where there were sparks of a really great idea for world building, and then it was just executed so poorly.
You know what we need? If only someone had a podcast that was all about taking a movie where there was like a really good core idea and then trying to see if they could rebuild that movie in a better way to say like, here's the movie that it could have been.
Man.
Do you think there's a podcast anywhere out there like that?
I know that there is a podcast like that, and I'm scared at the prospect of this movie.
For those who are wondering, Jeff has actually just started a prospect like that, and I'm trying to push him to have me on to do one of these movies. But yeah, I that to me is a very helpful perspective, because I will admit, I hate every single moment of the pod race scene. I resent it.
Okay.
Because for me, I think like I didn't have that sense of childlike wonder watching it. And action in general, fight scenes are not normally my bag. And in this one, I had absolutely no doubt that Anakin was going to win. And I think there are parts of it that the animation's good, but it's so clearly CGI that I never got into it. I never felt exhilarated by it.
Yeah.
But I think part of it is just because I'm like, wait, guys, we need to get to Coruscant. Why are you wasting 20 minutes showing me this utterly meaningless race?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think I knew that it had been so built up, and I remember every time I read about it, I was like, but why? Why are you putting that in a movie that's about different things? And again, I think if this had been a different movie about like, what if, here was a brilliant thing. What if 50, the first prequel movie is set 50 or 100 years before the Anakin Skywalker story begins.
Finally, we're getting to the thing that I've been wanting to say for so damn long, because you've been saying that the prequels need to do this, and they don't. They don't need to do it. It's only because we were told that they were going to do Anakin Skywalker. They don't need to do it.
Yeah. No, if the prequels hadn't been an Anakin Skywalker movie, they don't have to be. You're totally right. But like, do you remember I don't know if you're old enough, but do you remember the marketing campaign for this movie?
I don't. I was not very aware at the time.
Yeah, that's totally fine. One of the most, the poster that I remember seeing up all over the place and that all my friends were talking about had a picture of Jake Lloyd, or a picture of, the young Anakin Skywalker,
mm-hmm.
and the shadow he was casting was very clearly the shadow of Darth Vader.
Mm.
And like, that poster says, come watch the Anakin Skywalker story. Because you're right, if they had done a prequel that was just, we're going to start you by showing you a movie that tells you about life in the Republic and tells you about the Jedi.
Build the galaxy.
It's about an 8-year-old kid who no one figured out could be a Jedi until he was discovered on this planet called Tatooine. Then yeah, throw in the pod race. That's a great scene. And give us a great movie. And it can be a kid's movie, and it's fine. And it has to plant some seeds for what the, Anakin story will do, but it doesn't have to do all the stuff that we want it to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this would be okay. What we're looking at, just to give you a little taste of what we did on on Monday Morning Movie Medics. We're looking at probably 3 distinct stories that we would have to break this up into. We're looking at Anakin growing up. We're looking at the fall of the Republic, and we're looking at no, not even the fall of the Republic. We're looking at establishing the Republic and how trade agreements freaking work, and
right.
why trade agreements, or why a trade federation has power against a sovereign nation. That's a totally different story, though. Like
Yeah.
we're saying, we've got
And maybe let's keep the stories about financial bureaucracy and the stories for kids kind of separate.
separate. Yeah. So we got that one. We got Anakin growing up and living in on Tatooine in the backwater area. You know, it could even be it could start and end with him still being a slave under Watto. And then we get where this movie wants to be and start it with where we are, where we have this established trade federation doing a bad thing against a sovereign nation and it being okay, and where we've got a backwater planet that we have seen what happens on backwater planets, and then we can eliminate the pod race, because the pod race is there to establish that Anakin can be a fighter pilot. That's all it's for.
Yeah.
We can eliminate that, trim the movie down a little bit, and get a tighter plot of the beginning of the fall of the Republic.
Yeah. Especially because, and this is, and again, it's a timeline quibble, but it goes to like what Matt is always talking about that deep continuity. Because here's another one. When I watched the when I watched A New Hope, that movie, and I hear Obi-Wan and Anakin talking about the Jedi, and I watch the Imperial officer tell Darth Vader that no one still believes in that centuries old forgotten religion of the Force that Darth Vader still clings on to.
Yep.
The impression I have is that the overthrow of the Jedi happened generations ago. And that Obi-Wan and Anakin were two of kind of like the last holdouts, like that they, maybe there was like some secret cabal of Jedi who was hiding from everything, and that these two were raised in that. And that the killing of Anakin by Vader was thought of as like, maybe Vader was one of that last little cabal, and that his killing was at a time when most people had already forgotten that the Jedi existed. Because what makes no sense here is, like you said, all of this is supposed to be about, maybe 20 years pass from this movie until the birth of Luke Skywalker. And then another 20 years pass. I think even that's generous. I think it's more like 15 on the first one. But let's say 20. So 40 years pass between everyone running around knowing the Jedi are everywhere in the galaxy to people talking about the Jedi as this ancient religion. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yep. And during that time, like that 20 years is where the Jedi were very freaking active.
Yeah. And I'll keep touting the TV show The Clone Wars. The Clone Wars does a very good job of showing that that's the time when a lot of people are like, maybe the Jedi aren't the heroes we think they are. The Jedi are falling from their pedestals. But you're right. That's like, what if, even just to say, let's keep it this movie. What if, they're on Tatooine and, Watto, there's none of this bet stuff, but Watto says like, sure, I can fix it for you, but, give me till tomorrow. And Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are wandering around because, first of all, I think Obi-Wan has to be there meeting Anakin, because it makes no sense that Qui-Gon's the one to push it. We talked about that already.
Yep.
But what if, they're just like, all right, what do we do on Tatooine? Well, everyone's going to this pod race thing. Let's check it out. And they happen to watch this little kid win a pod race in this amazing way. And Qui-Gon's like, does that seem like he has Jedi reflexes? And Obi-Wan's like, yeah, let's go chat with that kid and figure out what's going on.
The Force is strong with him. I feel it.
This means that in some ways, not even the pod race, it's that we spend 20 minutes arguing about the betting on the pod race.
Oh, yeah.
And watching him build the pod racer. What if we just did it as that? Just like a 5-minute, they wander in, they see him doing this incredible race. You get to see the incredible race, and that's how they know he's a Jedi, and that's why they try to talk to him.
Yeah, let's see. The only reason they need the pod race is for Qui-Gon to win the hyperdrive and win Anakin. And the only reason they need to, like, the only reason that that is actually needed is because Republic credits are no good there. If
Right.
Republic credits were fine, but it does take time to rebuild a damn engine,
Yeah.
it
You
would
just
have
have a,
been fine.
let me also say, by the way, in terms of Jedi ethics, if I go to some foreign country where, for whatever reason, American dollars are not accepted because the American dollar is just not a currency that's used there. If I use mind control to try and make a merchant take my American dollars, which will be utterly worthless to him, which now means that he has given me something of great value and I've given him nothing of value in return, the word for that is theft.
Yeah.
Qui-Gon Jinn is trying to steal this motivator from Watto. Now, we later realize Watto owns slaves, and so we can say, like, maybe he's a scumbag and he should be stolen from. But Qui-Gon doesn't know any of that at this point. Like, he's just trying to steal from the guy.
Yeah.
It's a little thing, but it just always bothered me.
Yeah. I mean, that in watching this movie again, I noticed this time how much Qui-Gon does the mind trick to try to get his way. Like, so many people tell him no, and he's just like, well, I always get my way. He mind tricks to try to convince people to go along with him. He tries to mind trick Watto. He ends up not being able to and has to use a different force power to get his way. And then whenever the council tells him no, he's just like, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Qui-Gon is the spoiled brat here.
How much better would it have been if Qui-Gon lived through the second movie? And so Qui-Gon was actually a big part of raising Anakin, and that's where Anakin gets... Because everything you just said about Qui-Gon, Anakin's the exact same way.
Exactly. Oh my God, yes! Okay, so... outside of the Jedi Council's wisdom and advised course of action, these two Jedi are both attempting to apprentice the same Padawan, and it's like, it's like being pulled between divorced parents because Qui-Gon is the shitty parent who's always manipulative and trying to get his way, and Obi-Wan is the straight-laced guy who's just like, no, this is the law.
Yeah, I think you could even play it as like they're both kind of problematic because Obi-Wan's also the like, no, you can't ever go play with your friends. You'll get attachments to your friends. That's not okay. You got to stay in and like practice your forms and stuff. Like
Qui-Gon lets me go play with my friends.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we've proven that there could be a very good Script Doctors episode here. But let's get back on track here just a bit.
Okay.
Because we've already gone an hour, so I want to not drag this out too long. And we've talked about this already, but I wanted to kind of go through them officially. Let's talk about how do we feel this movie fits into the overall story. First of all, in world building, what do you think it does well or does not do well in terms of like building the overall Star Wars world?
I think that there were ideas of good world building in here. Like, we got a little taste of the Republic. We got a little taste of the Jedi Council. We get a little taste of what happens on backwater planets. Like, we got a little taste of diplomacy failing. Like, we got all of those things that any one of those, any one of those could have been like a solid movie in this entry or, in this canon, to help to build out this world and tell us more about it. But I feel like maybe they tried to jam too many things in and tried to tell too many stories, which is a constant problem in stories like this.
I think that's fair. And I think I agree with you. Like, I feel like a lot of the world they build is quite interesting. Like, I think the visuals of Coruscant are fantastic. I think, like, the, seeing that, like, learning that the big problem with the Senate is bureaucracy. Like, anyone who's ever followed what happens when one nation invades another and that invaded nation goes to the UN and asks for help, like, the Naboo story, like, that resonates as 100% real. Like, you know, and one thing I hadn't really thought about until this time I watched it is it actually does kind of an interesting job of setting up the Separatists because, and we'll talk about in later movies, I'm very frustrated that they don't tell us more about why the Separatists are separating. But one of the things that's like hinted at least is the idea that part of it's because the Republic claims to be helping all these people who it doesn't. And so I can understand, like, if I was a citizen of Naboo, I would 100% be ready to join the separatist movement at this point. Because what I would see is that my queen went to the Republic said, thanks but no thanks, we're going to spend 2 years in diplomatic wrangling. And so my queen came back with these two kind of off-the-wall Jedi and made an alliance with the Gungans and won herself.
Where was that story?
What if Naboo had been an active part of the separatist movement? Okay. We're not going to go too deep on that, but yeah. So there's world building. What do you think about its role in the grand story arc?
Honestly, it felt light in the grand story arc. I think that this one was the world building episode, so to speak, to kind of establish the foundation, and then it did a piss poor job of that.
Yeah.
And as far as the grand story, it set the board, kind of.
Yeah.
But ultimately was just kind of lackluster in all of its performances.
Here's I've never really put it in these terms before, but I think this is helping. Like, when I think of a prequel, I don't want something that tells me what I already know.
Yes.
I know that Han Solo won the Millennium Falcon gambling against Lando Calrissian. I don't really need to see that. Or if I do, I don't need it to be a big deal. And I in the same way, kind of like, I know that, like, I feel like this movie or let me put it this way. You can show me the things that I already know, but you have to mostly tell me, you have to fill in the gaps that I didn't know. You have to tell me, why is it that, and like, I wish someone had just sat down and watched New Hope, or maybe watched the whole original trilogy and said, what are all the things that we say, but we never really explain? We never really explain, or we never really show. Why does Obi-Wan feel so guilty? Why did the Empire take over from the Republic? All these things. Because I really like the term you used. It puts the pieces on the board, but it doesn't give us any reason to care about that.
Yeah.
What about in terms of any Easter eggs that you really liked, or inconsistencies that you thought were kind of dumb?
No, we're not going to get into that. No, I mean, like, there are all kinds of things that are, little Easter eggs that could be thrown in, like, oh, look, lightsabers and Jedi, and, they use this power, like, a lot, and, force push and pull, and, like, here's two guys that are, like, fully developed from birth, maybe, mm-hmm. as actual Jedi. Like, this is what it looks like. This is what Luke could have been like if he had been, discovered young or whatever.
Right. Like, this is how a Jedi is supposed to be trained and raised.
Right. This is the pinnacle that he's supposed to strive toward. And, knowing how strong Yoda was and having them, like, even though everybody hates the midichlorians thing, I think it's a natural way to go when you've got this thing kind of built up. And like you said, it's evangelical almost to be like, oh yeah, science proves it. It's right here. I think that the midichlorians thing, especially them taking a blood sample from Anakin and putting it through and being like, wow, he's got more midichlorian power than Master Yoda. That's a big deal. Like, that is a firm foundation of, like, holy crap, this guy is legit and is going to be big. And I think that was a great little thing to drop in there, but then was, like, wildly inconsistent later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the thing with the Easter eggs and the things is there's just so much stuff that's inconsistent. For me, the biggest one I want to talk about, though, is I feel like this is supposed to be take the small, because in some ways, the original 3 movies are very small. Like, we go to all these different worlds, but we only ever see the war. We never see what's happening out. We see one criminal overlord, but we never really see, like, what's life like for the average person on the average planet in the Empire now.
Yeah.
And this movie is supposed to do that. I felt like it kind of does the opposite because it tries to make so many things so tied in together And for me, the most grievous sin of that is introducing R2-D2 and C-3PO this early into the movie.
Oh my God. Yes.
Because, like, then it's just like, okay, so everything has always been connected and it's always been together all the time. It also tells me that astromech droids haven't advanced in technology in 30 years, which seems a little bit weird. But also like, but also just this idea of, I mean, first of all, it just causes huge plot inconsistencies because, and we'll get them more in the later movies, but like Obi-Wan at one point says, like, I don't remember having owned a droid before, when we know that he spent a huge amount of time with these literal 2 droids. Yeah, so it just, I just hated that. I didn't think it told us anything good about Anakin's character. I didn't think having R2, be a Nabooian droid that helped. It all seemed so dumb. It just seemed like George Lucas trying to do like, aha, isn't this cute? We can sell more R2 toys now.
Yeah.
When we just didn't need it.
Yeah, and then it's sorry, the way that you pointed out, it's like, well, I mean, Obi-Wan was quite old at that point. Senility's a bitch, man.
Well, but also think about it. I went back and I did the math, and this is all from like established things. Obi-Wan is 56 years old in A New Hope.
Oof.
Does he look like he's in his mid-50s?
No.
Especially since we've established that Jedi age, like, are in perfect health and age a lot slower than everyone else.
Yeah, they're like D&D monks.
Yeah.
That's rough. Damn.
Yeah, having Obi-Wan be like 18 in this movie, again, makes no sense.
Yep.
All right, any other kind of final thoughts? I got one or two just like small things that I just were dumb and bothered me.
Well, it feels like this entire film franchise, just the films, because like you said, everything is connected to everything. Oh my God. Like this whole thing is like, it's set in West Virginia, everybody knows everybody. Everybody's connected, everybody is in the same family even. And there's sister kissing.
I do have some listeners in West Virginia. Please don't make them stop listening, but okay,
I'm sorry. Okay, so no, it could be like this whole.
No, I get where you're coming from.
This whole thing is set in like one little community where everybody knows everybody and everybody's connected. Like it doesn't have to be West Virginia necessarily, but it could be Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm from. There was some sister kissing. Come on,
yeah, that's fair.
But like, expand it. You have a whole galaxy. It's really far away, and it's a long ass time ago. Use that. You've got this. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm very frustrated about it. But if you tell me that there is an entire galaxy and we've got ships that can jump from planet to planet in different star systems and they have a discussion about it in this movie where Anakin says, do all of them have planets on, like, in these star systems? Has anybody gone to them all? That sets up so much that you could work with.
Yeah. And yet it just keeps coming back to the same things. Like, is there any reason why Anakin has to be from Tatooine?
Because that's where Luke was from.
But Luke is hidden away from Anakin. Darth Vader at the end of it. So why did Luke have to be put on the same planet that his father was from?
Because that's where his uncle was?
I guess.
I mean, that's what they said in the end of 3. Uncle Owen was there, and they went back there in the 3rd one?
Right. Because Anakin would never think to go back to his brother to see if maybe any of his kids had hung around.
Half-brother.
Half-brother.
He didn't even exist at this point.
Anyway, we'll get to that. The consistencies there. Couple other just small things I wanted to rank on. And fans, I promise you, I mean, we're ranking on this movie hard because we love these movies so much when they're good. And we're going to have a lot of praise for the other movies. And even here, I think, like I said, there were some good things, to be sure, but a lot of bad. The scene where they're going through the planet's core in the ship, which, the geology of this makes no sense whatsoever. But putting that aside, just in terms of basic movie making, you don't use the same trick twice. It's just boring. And so one fish attacks their ship and then is bitten and eaten by another ship. by another fish. I don't quite understand the biosphere of how these huge megafauna and fish live, but sure, fine. 5 minutes later, their ship is attacked by another big fish, and how are they rescued? Because another big fish eats it.
Yeah. And then, like, that's a plant with no payoff, or a plant with the same payoff, or the same, like, the plant is the payoff, kind of. Like, because those are so close together, it's basically worthless. Like, it's pointless to the film. Get rid of it. But the line that he says of where he said, Qui-Gon says, there's always a bigger fish. Like, that's important. That could be integral to his character. That has so much, implication that this movie could run on, and it just doesn't. See,
Anyway.
It's a little bit cathartic though to look at it and pick out the good stuff, strip away the bad, and try to rebuild it in a good image. And that's why we have Monday Morning Movie Medics.
So as a way of, I think we're about wrapping up. So Jeff, why don't you tell us a little more about where, if people are enjoying listening to you, what other podcasts do you do at the moment?
We started with the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast as, a way to get my Marvel fandom out there, because I was just talking to Matt about it all the time with no real benefit. So we took that to the internet, and we have Stranded Panda as our network, and new on that network is Monday Morning Movie Medics, which is my idea of, I took the water cooler discussions that we have where, a coworker and I sit down and say, hey, did you see that movie over the weekend? Or like, what did you watch over the weekend? And we talk about, what movies we saw. And then we, if it was not a great movie, we come up with ways where it could have been a better movie and how we might be able to save it. And then, of course, those kinds of discussions get brought into the podcast, Monday Morning Movie Medics, available on iTunes, everywhere your podcasts are found. And we just started with the X-Men Apocalypse arc, and we're rebuilding that movie. It's a 4-episode arc to start with.
Okay. I'm definitely excited for that. I know you've been talking about this a lot. Listeners, definitely please check it out. And also please, write them a review, because for new podcasts when it's just getting started, getting a good review, especially a 5-star review, it helps them. It helps them know what's working, what's not, and how to make it a better podcast. But also it makes sure that they're high in the ranks for the podcast catchers, and so that more people are going to listen and more people are joining the conversations. On that subject, thank you to you fans for checking this out as we do a kind of new thing, talking about the movies. Would love to know what you think. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on email. All the information is in the show notes and on the Facebook page. If you search for Star Wars Universe Podcast, you should find it. But really, just wherever you got this podcast, the show notes should be in there. Just click on the link that's right in there. Let us know what you thought of this episode, where you agreed with us, where you disagreed. If this felt cathartic to you, if you want to tell us you love Phantom Menace, you want to tell us more about what you like it, please do. The other thing you can do, though, is the next movie we're going to talk about is the next in the series, Attack of the Clones. We'll be talking about that in 2 weeks. So if you've got thoughts about Attack of the Clones, write into us. Tell us. I think it's generally regarded as not a great movie. But let us know. If you want to just join in the cathartic ranting, let us know. If you want to tell us why you like parts of the movie, because I do think there are some parts that are quite good. Let us know that. And it can either just be something we think about, or if you want, I'll happily read your comment on air and talk about how we feel about what you had to say. So it's a great way to support the podcast, get your own voice heard, be part of the conversation. That's, at the end of the day, why we do this, is to have these conversations. Because, Jeff, I don't know about you, but I started doing this podcast because I realized I was spending way too much time, before COVID, sitting around the water cooler with my friends, just shooting the breeze about ethical questions in superhero stuff or Star Wars stuff. And eventually decided, I'm going to waste so much time talking about it, I might as well be productive about it and put myself
might as well record
podcast.
it and put it on the internet.
Yeah. So that's why we do this kind of stuff. Please write in, let us know what you think. Thank you so much for being a listener. Jeff, thank you so much for being part of this. Have a great day.
I have spoken.
Yes, you have.